Between the 23rd and 26th of May 2019, I was a guest of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board at their Wine Summit program, which takes place every 2 years. What follows in this series is in-depth coverage of the journey along the Danube stream of the summit. This features a mixture of presentations from members of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board and a combination of presentations and tours of participating wineries. If you've ever wanted to increase your knowledge of Austrian wine, this is the place to be. And do be sure to subscribe to the podcast at interpretingwine.com/listen so that you're alerted when new episodes go live. Today's episode of the Austrian Wine Summit series features Roman Horvath, MW, leading a Wachau Masterclass. Accompanied by two of the local winemakers who explain their wines as the time comes. Roman first sets the scene around the Wachau before introducing 6 flights of wines, each demonstrating different features of the region. Given the depth of the masterclass, I'd highly recommend downloading a couple of documents that I attach the links for below in the description. Firstly, a regional map, which Roman does refer to at several points in the discussion. And secondly, the Wachau Souterrain, geology and wine, which is most relevant as we move from flight to flight. And as ever, I'd also recommend having any or all of these wines in the glass in front of you, and to taste along with this in-depth Wachau Masterclass. Enjoy!
I would like to welcome you for the panel tasting Wachau wines of Wachau. So you had an exciting tour on the Danube. You saw all the vineyards that we're tasting now. I'm sure you can remember them, but just to be sure, I'm going to indicate you them on our vineyard map as soon as we have the wine on in the glass. You met Heinz Frischengruber, winemaker of Domaine Wachau. His brother, George Frischengruber, is the wine number 1. We are tasting a wine from the southern bank of the Danube. That's the first one, Ried Zanzl. And because we have here 2 winemakers, 2 producers, one from the southern bank, from Rossatz, Rührsdorf, Joe Fischer, and Franz Hirtzberger from Spitz, from the western part. We will concentrate on the areas we come from. And I just ask Joe to start with the very first wine.
The first wine is from, as he mentioned, from George Frischengruber, a very good friend of mine, and brother from Heinz Frischengruber. And this wine is coming from the complete western part of our area in Rossatz. I think you remember at the Snail where you stood there. You saw a little bit of the vineyards already on the other side of the river. And from that part, about 5 kilometers west, is where that wine comes from. So the single vineyard in this case is mainly primary rock, which is in this case Köhler gneiss, and also mixed with some löss parts from the Ice Age. So löss is also a very big issue here in the Wachau Valley, especially in some bays and stuff, where just the wind was blown on during Ice Age. And this löss is actually a very good, very fertile soil. That means it's very good in water saving, especially in dry seasons, which is very good for Grüner Veltliner especially. And so that means in all the löss parts, Grüner Veltliner can handle some dryness a little easier than on primary rock soils, and that's a good advantage. And I think in this case you get a lot of minerals in the nose, with some sprinkly stuff, but also in the when you taste the wine, it's very balanced. Also a little bit of fruitiness in it, which is mainly coming from the löss. But in the end, you have a nice acidity and a very straight finish, which is normally coming from primary rock soil. So the wines from primary rock is not very full-bodied normally. They are a little bit more on the elegant side and the acidity-driven side. So that's wine number one. Maybe you explain wine number two.
Wine number two is actually from my brother, from the Weinhofmeisterei in Wösendorf. The Kollmütz site is a hill with, especially on the bottom, a thick layer of loess. So again, we have normally Grüner Veltliner more on the deeper grounded soils, and on the hillsides they are normally covered with some loess because it's as you mentioned, just better in holding the water, and Grüner Veltliner needs more of that. As you can recognize, the wine is very full-bodied. It's also a style of the winery that we harvest very late, and that combined with the very heavy soil or more heavy soil gives very elegant but full-bodied wines.
Mm-hmm. I put the vineyard map up here. Here on the screen. This is the very first wine you see on the southern bank of the Danube. About 2/3 of all the vineyards, so look on Wachau in general, about 2/3, 60, rather 70% of all the vineyards on the northern bank of the Danube. For a long time, the northern bank, so where we are right now, north of the Danube, was the very, very famous one. The well-known winery were situated only here on the northern bank. And on the southern bank, decent wine was produced, nice wine. We have a lot of these very typical Austrian wine taverns that we call Heuriger on the southern bank. Of course, you find them also here on the northern bank. But the situation changed some 10 years ago, and there are some really, really great producers now on the southern side, and one of them is sitting here, young mavericks doing really, really exciting things. And very, very first wine, Ried Zanzl, is here. It is part of the eastern Wachau, so I'm sure you have learned about that the Danube makes here a very, very strong band. And the warmer climatic influences that we have from the east, the Pannonian climatic influences that are established in the Hungarian plate, they influence Burgenland heavily. You have a lot of red wine in Burgenland. They influence Vienna, they influence Kamptal, Kremstal, and these Pannonian climatic influences, they stretch out into Wachau, but only to this eastern part here. And from here on, it becomes cooler and cooler. And the Ried Zanzl is still somehow influenced by the warmer air masses, but it is on the southern bank, so there's a kind of balance between the Pannonian climatic influences, but some cooler air streams that are coming from the west. So very, very important. It is part of eastern Wachau, and you don't have this extremely steep terrace. You have a certain creaminess in the wine. Very, very, very good texture. The second wine that Franz explained is here, in the town of Wösendorf. And also, so Wösendorf with this umlaut, which you don't have in your language, I guess. And very easy to remember. Ried Kollmütz. Mütz has also an umlaut, and it comes from Wösendorf with an umlaut.
There are actually two hills side by side, just separated by a creek. On the left side you have Kollmütz in Wösendorf, and on the right side you have Kollmütz. In Joch.
We saw from the bottom.
Yeah. So it's like.
This one is that a barrel fermented?
Tank fermented.
Tank fermented.
Yeah, we're very pragmatic in.
You did less stirring?
No. As I know, my brother does it very similar to
That's the question was if it was barrel fermented, the wine. As a basic rule, Of course, there are some exceptions, a few exceptions, but basically most of the wines are stainless steel fermented, and very, very often wooden casks serve for development of the wine for a certain period. Lees steering would be very, very rare. I guess most of the wineries would say no. So this would be a very rare exception.
But you get this very, very intense character you also get from very, very ripe fruit. So when you harvest very late, you also get a lot of texture from that, and that's why this wine has some full body. Yes.
And if you have a look on this screen slide here on climate, up to 14 days difference in ripeness from the eastern beginning to the western end. And now we're tasting wine here from the most coolest part of the Wachau, from the Spitz Valley. You see most of the vineyards along the Danube here, but then there's a certain part that stretches away from the Danube, and this is the Spitz Valley. And the third wine that we're tasting is coming from here, Ried Kalkofen, and this is a Riesling from winery Gritsch. Reflecting the cooler part, a very, very steep terraced vineyard, as you have seen them on your boat ride, which is a classic situation here in Wachau. Handcrafted wines, little to no mechanization, and the Spitz Valley is an expression, a very, very concentrated expression of this handcrafted steep terraced approach in the Wachau.
This Spitzer Graben or Spitzer Valley, which goes here further left from the Danube. The last vineyard there on the very left side is a training. It's on around 500 meters above sea level. So what I'd like to say is we're in Spitz, we're about 220 meters. And when you go like 10 km further northwest, you come to on the Waldviertler Plateau. And there the base level is around 650, 700 meters. So it's dramatically would be the wrong word, but significant colder than here in the Danube Valley. And those little valleys which come in from the back always bring very cold air to the center of the town. And as further they are on the left side here, as more influenced they are by these cold winds.
So you mean 700 meter altitude? You have a vineyard there?
No, there are no vineyards anymore.
Okay.
It's too cold there.
Yeah.
But the highest is 500.
The highest is 500. Yes.
So
500 to the end of the...
So you got that. The Danube is at 200 meters above sea level. So the boat ride you did at an altitude of 200 meters above sea level, and you have seen there are some flat areas, the valley floor very close to the Danube. So vineyards start at around 200, 210 meters. But the highest altitude that we reach in Wachau is at around 500 meters, slightly above. So there's a difference of 300 meters in altitude, and that means a lot. It means a lot. On high altitude, you have cooler airstreams. You can pick later. You have somehow leaner wines that offer slightly more elegance. So altitude is very important, but also the difference between Eastern Wachau and Western Wachau, warmer, cooler, is very, very important. Exposition is very, very important. Yes. Here on the northern bank, you have almost all vineyards somehow southern exposing, yes, turning slightly into eastern and western, southeastern, southwestern exposing. On the southern bank, you have vineyards that are somehow northern exposing, that is true. But Joe knows more on that.
I can tell you that about, I would say it's a little bit more from east to west than from north to south. So like where I have my vineyards, which were quite in the middle of the Wachau Valley. Yes. In terms of ripening, I would say we're also quite in the middle. So these areas here, they normally start harvesting. And I would say then it's our area starting harvesting about 10 days later, and then there's the region in Spitz who is harvesting 10 days later after I started. The Pannonia influence.
Would affect more on the vineyard than, let's say,
Correct.
north-south.
Correct. You have the Atlantic influence from the western part, coming from the ocean. And then you have the Pannonian influence, which is coming from that side, from the Hungarian side.
Yes.
Correct. So they bring warm air streams into the valley, and the ocean brings cold weather into the ocean. Also, normally, if you see like summer storms or rainy summer days, if it's cold, then it's coming from that side. And if there's warm wind bringing rain into the valley from the eastern side, then we have sometimes problems with hail, because
Okay. So this
the weather mixing.
And the
Correct.
cold
So cold weather from the ocean is not a problem, but normally it's the warm winds coming from the eastern part, which sometimes brings hail. Correct.
Thanks.
We are pouring now flight number 1 on page 72. And we're also pouring flight number 2. So you have poured 4 wines. So the first flight that we are doing, we are again in the town of Rossatz, on the southern bank. You can see it here on the screen. I indicated the area that we are tasting. We are doing Ried Steiger. And the very first wine now in your left glass, Grüner Smaragd Typ Steiger, is from Joe himself. So he can give you all the details on this wine. And he will also talk about the second wine, which is from the same village, from the same vineyard, just a very, very different vintage. 2007 from winery Sigl. And then with the next flight, we will move further east to the town of Mautern.
Yeah, so the first 2 wines, the first one is coming from my winery, and the second wine is also from the same single vineyard, but different producer, also from a producer from Rossatz, which is called Sigl. So Rossatz itself is actually the little town what you see here, and in the curve, this is actually the single vineyard where this wine, the first 2 wines, comes from. And if you remember, staying on that viewing area, if you looked at over the river, on the other side of the river, that was actually the vineyard where this wine is coming from. So the single vineyard Steiger itself is a flat area, so it's not terraced, not terraced, and it's mainly influenced by the Danube from former times. So you need to imagine that the Danube was much bigger in former times, and so there's lots of influence right now, correct. So it's mainly gravel, but also a lot of loam and sand, and also some influence of löss from the Ice Age again, which also came down from the mountain. And it's 2016 vintage, the first wine, which keeps all the winemakers in whole Europe pretty awake, because 16, as you maybe know or not know, there was a huge frost in all over Europe, and also in the Wachau Valley, of course. And so the biggest problem, so that the biggest loss was in the area of Spitzergraben. They had at this time sometimes a loss of about 70 to 80%. In my area, it was a little less. It was 30%, but loss is loss. So it was still not so nice. Correct, yeah. And there was also frost in Burgundy, Germany. I remember it was like frosted everywhere, but sometimes, so that actually the grapes are also then you have less crop, and so sometimes there's also a little bit more concentration into the wine. So when you see here, what I expect in this one now, there's a lot of peppery taste, which comes mainly from the Grüner Veltliner itself, yeah. But also, if you take a sip, then you will see that it's a good mouth feeling, also with the peppery finish in the end, which comes mainly from the gravel. So gravel and loam and humus normally gives more structured wine, a little bit more full body, and maybe a little, let's say, less straightness, little less elegance. Correct. Second wine is now from Sigl, also a very good producer, well-known producer. And 2007 was one of the best vintages in the first century, from 2000 on. Yeah, it was was warm weather from the beginning up to the end, but not too warm, not too cold, so it was actually quite perfect. So lots of people also speak about the golden 7 years, which is now, in Austria, it's 97 and 2007. So 2017 was not so golden, but also golden, let's say that way. And then we have wine number 3 and wine number 4. So wine number 3 is coming now from Mautern, which is right here. Actually the last, or let's say the eastern part of the Wachau Valley. So everything which is now east from here is already Kremstal. So this is the last point of the Wachau Valley. In this case, it's a single vineyard called Silberbichl, which is, as far as I know, mainly Löss dominated with a little influence of primary rock soil. Is that true? Yeah. I guess so, correct, yeah. So what you see here, maybe, which is maybe a little different to the first two wines, is there's a little bit more creaminess in the wine, maybe a little less feeling of acid, which also comes normally from Löss. And maybe a little bit more ripening flavor, a little bit more yellowish fruits, yellowish fruits. And yeah, the last producer is called Eder, wine number 4, which is I see it's not single vineyard based, but Riesling Smaragd, so it's not Grüner Veltliner, the only one in this flight. 2013 vintage, which was also very good in quality, but very bad in quantity, because in this case we didn't have frost, we didn't have any diseases or stuff, but in this case we had very bad weather during flowering. And so that means that during flowering we had I think about 60 or 70 millimeters of rain right into flowering, so the caps didn't fall off, so that the flower didn't go off actually, and that left very little grapes behind. So the grapes did ripen, but they didn't have the full expression, and so the grapes stayed small. So the loss, the grapes, or like let's say the quantity was about 30% less than normal. But also in this case, there's then a little bit more concentration in the wine, also higher contents of extracts, which is very important, especially for Rieslings. The importance also here, in terms of Vinea Wachau, is that you're only allowed to put Smaragd on the label if your winery is also based in the Wachau Valley, and also the wine is bottled in the Wachau Valley. That's also important. Otherwise, you're not allowed to be a member of the Vinea Wachau.
A few, just 2-3 words, some basic information on Wachau. So kindly have a look on the map here on the screen. So all the green dots here, all the green areas are vineyards. If you follow my line here are also vineyards. However, this is already the neighboring wine region Kremstal. If you're standing here, you wouldn't see the border between Kremstal and Kamptal, because it's just an ongoing vineyard, and here exactly is the border drawn, but you wouldn't see it when you are standing in the vineyard. This is the area of Mautern. Somehow deeper soils. You don't find the steep terraces that you have witnessed now during the boat ride. You don't have the steep terraces in the town of Mautern. Mautern, the last 2 wines in this flight. So they're deeper soils, richer soils, somehow more fertile soils, and the wines usually show slightly juicier, with slightly lower acidity, rounder wines. Climatically, very, very similar to the Kremstal. And I explained at the very, very beginning that we have these Pannonian climatic influences here in this part here. And then the Danube makes this strong bend, and it becomes cooler. Which means that this here, and partly also this part here, is slightly warmer than the rest of the Wachau. So you went on the boat in the town of Spitz, which is somehow the coolest part of the Wachau. And here the Mautern area, there's also difference, and you saw that when you entered the Wachau by bus, that out of a sudden a completely different scenery opened in front of you. We have a kind of hillsides to the southern side of the Danube, which is called Dunkelsteiner Wald in German. And this starts here at this point. The town of Mautern is somehow open, and it's definitely warmer than the rest of Wachau. Okay? The Danube itself, very, very important here in Wachau. The Danube, very, very important. The Danube has a total length of 2,800 kilometers, or almost 3,000 kilometers. Mostly, the Danube is a very, very slow-moving river because there are electricity water plants and the water is blocked. The Danube is one of the very, very, very few areas where the Danube is still free-flowing. And you have witnessed that today, that it is a pretty fast-moving river. This is very rare. If you go to Krems, the Danube looks like a lake. Very, very silent, very soft, and you can do sailing in the town of Krems, just a few kilometers further east. But here in the Wachau region, it's a very, very short distance. The river is free-flowing. It has a pretty high speed of movement, the Danube, which allows all airstreams to be moved towards towards east very, very quickly. Very important for the microclimate, because as Franz just mentioned, we have these cold airstreams coming from the north, coming down to the Wachau Valley. We have them from the south, and immediately they are moved further east by the Danube. And this is a unique situation in our climate here, because there's a constant permanent move in different air masses, which enhances the purity and the fruitiness and the flavors of Wachau wines. Let's move on to the next slide. Before we are going in detail on the next few wines, of course we will wait till all the wines are poured. We will tell you a little bit about Vinea Wachau, or about the Area Protection Association, and why we have these terms Federspiel Smaragd and what they stand for. But let's wait till the wines are poured. So Wachau, the region of Wachau, the wine growing area of Wachau, is one of the very small ones in Austria. I can say that because I'm not from here. I'm not a Wachau born. I moved here to the region a few years ago. It is the region with the strongest history. And this is the area, the wine growing region, with the strongest reputation and by far the highest quality level all of Austria. Nowhere else you find such a high number of super premium icon producers than here in Wachau. One reason for that is that Wachau has a somehow historic advantage. Wachau started to concentrate on quality 20, 30 years earlier than the rest of Austria. One sign for that is the creation of the so-called Vinea Wachau. Vinea Wachau. This is not an association of some friends who sat down and said, well, let's make a club, an association. It's a protection association for all the producers here in the region. From the very, very, very smallest local producer till the high-end super premium producers, so all a member of Vinea Wachau. Behind the rules of Vinea Wachau, there are extremely strict rules, so extremely strict parameters. Being a member of Vinea Wachau, you have to have all your vineyards in the area of Wachau. You're not allowed to have vineyards outside of Wachau. You're not allowed to buy in grapes from a different region. You have to bottle your wine in Wachau, and you're not even allowed to have any financial connection with a winery outside of Wachau. To my knowledge, it's the strictest regulation that you can find in the whole wine world. And being a member of Vinea Wachau, and some 95% of all the vineyards of Wachau are under the Vinea Wachau regulation. And the question just before was that up on the Kellerberg, you had the wine from Pichler-Krutzler. He doesn't name Smaragd on the label because he's not member of Vinea Wachau. And the reason for him is that he has also ownership in the Burgenland. He does some red wine production in Burgenland, so he's not 100% a Wachau grower. He has got also vineyards in a different area, and that way he cannot be member of the Vinea Wachau and not carry the designation, the category name Steinfeder or Federspiel or Smaragd, and that's why you didn't read the name Smaragd on the label. So being a member of Wachau, Vinea Wachau, you have these three category names. I'm sure you have heard of them, and you have read them in the book now, mostly the Smaragd category name, and there's also Federspiel and there's Steinfeder. That does not directly refer to quality. It's a style of a wine. It's a weight class. With the name Steinfeder on the label, you can expect a very light wine with very high acidity, a lot of freshness, and maximum 11.5% alcohol. It's a wine style that is mostly consumed in Austria. A very, very typical Austrian wine style. We Austrians even like a very light white wine, have with some mineral water to have a white wine spritz. So Steinfeder is mostly in Austria consumed. Federspiel offers all the typicity, all the elegance and finesse of a medium-bodied white wine. This is the typical white wine style that is poured by the glass, a very, very classic food pairing wine, very versatile on the table, and you can expect all the typical character of the grape variety, but also of the origin of the single vineyard. But it's medium-bodied, 12 or 12.5% alcohol, very finesse-driven. And then there's the last category, what we are mostly tasting right now. This is Smaragd, and you can see here from Steinfeder to Federspiel to Smaragd, it's also the time of picking. The earlier you pick, the lighter the wine style, the later you pick, the more full-bodied the wine is. This is very crucial, and this is important here because we have very cool climate. It is the coolest climate in Lower Austria, in Austria, and the time of picking is very, very important for the style of the wine. It would make a difference in very warm climate, then we wouldn't carry these category names, because in Bordeaux you define a perfect ripeness for Merlot, and then you have to quick as possible all your Merlot. But here you can start picking mid-September, end of September, beginning October, and you finish sometimes in November, and it's a very different wine style. And Smaragd stands for the full-bodied white wines, concentration, structure, depth, great complexity, and very, very important also longevity. What we are tasting here in these white wines, you have younger Smaragd styles and you have aged ones, wines that improve with time, and that's the Smaragd style. Minimum 12.5% alcohol. Nowadays, mostly you would read 13.5% alcohol on the label. In some warmer years, even 14. In very, very warm years, maybe even 14.5. Vinea Wachau was founded in 1983. You can see it here. And before that time, wines were labeled following the Austrian wine regulation. And in the 60s and 70s, wine was made in a different way, and also the quality was seen in a different way. And very, very often, Top wines had a little bit of residual sugar, but it also is related to the winemaking techniques, spontaneous fermentation, long aging in wooden casks. Kabinetts, Spätlese, Auslese that you saw down in our cellar is pre-Vinea Wachau style. When Vinea Wachau started in 1983, the idea was to have very, very elegant, dry white wines, no chaptalization, very important. All the ripeness comes from nature. Chaptalization was not allowed, which was a very, very big thing back then because they were extremely cold years and wine world just chaptalized to have the alcohol. And that changed actually the idea of a good wine in Austria. So whenever you drink a Wachau wine, Steinfeder, Smaragd, you can expect cool climate, white wine, dry, fermented, either medium-bodied, light or full-bodied. Let's do the flight number 3 and flight number 4. And flight number 3 is Loibenberg. When you enter the Wachau by bus, and most of you are here the very, very first time, and you had a look on your right-hand side out of the bus, you saw a huge, steep, terraced vineyard, and that was the Loibenberg. Loibenberg is among the larger vineyards here in Wachau. It has some 25 to 30 hectares. And having that size in your head, or knowing 25, 30 hectares, for sure you know immediately that cannot be absolutely homogeneous, because you have Loibenberg at lower altitude, you have it at higher altitude, you have some side parallel valleys that are coming down from the north, so there are a little bit of colder influences in some parts than in others. So very, very often it also depends where the producer has its parcel, where it has its block. If you're at very high altitude, you might have a somehow lighter expression of a vineyard. If you're then maybe at the lower altitude of a vineyard. And as you know, it starts on low altitude, ends 400 meters, for example, in Loibenberg. Wine number 5, 2016, Ried Loibenberg from winery Eitzinger. And then we have the 2008 from Knoll. What you can taste here is also a difference in a house style, I would say, the philosophy. The idea of a winemaker is also very, very important. Wherever you go to Burgundy, Champagne, there are also different ideas in terms of working in the vineyards, time of picking, how you work in your cellar, fermentation, and so on. And the 2016, I think, to my opinion, is reflecting very, very clearly the style of Eitzinger. It's a very, very precise Grüner Veltliner, a very, very transparent Grüner Veltliner with a very, very exact and precise spiciness, extreme cleanliness in the wine. The wine has got good concentration, good body, but also a lot of elegance and finesse. Second wine from winery Knoll. Knoll stands for somehow juicier wines that usually offer a broader flavor spectrum. The flavor is usually slightly darker, but of course this is 2018 with some years of age. And 2018 was a very, very tricky year. Somehow cool during September, October, rainy. You had to wait long to reach Smaragd levels. And I think a very, very nice, a great example of a 2008 wine from the Ried Loibenberg. Loibenberg is a typical Eastern Wachau wine. No matter which house style, no matter which altitude, Loibenberg usually offers slightly more intense wines because it's warmer climate, it's Pannonian climatic influences. It's called, in German, we say the Herdplatte de Wachau, the oven of the Wachau, because it's always warmer than other vineyards and usually offers good concentration, good body, and always a certain juiciness on the palate. Also, a view from outside, Wachau is a very traditional and very conservative region, but in a positive way. Austria is a young wine producing country with a very, very short history in top wines. One reason is that for a long time there were only a few producers that believed in Grüner Veltliner, that it can produce high-end wines. So it was mostly produced as a very decent, nice, everyday wine. But you have to work a little bit with Grüner Veltliner. Grüner Veltliner needs a little bit help in the vineyard. It can yield very high and the vegetative growth is very, very strong. But when you help Grüner Veltliner, it can produce top wines. And Austria is a young wine producing country, and it went through its different kind of ideas and super cool fermentation, Grüner Veltliner with oak influence, and you can find it all over Austria and other regions. Wachau established its own rules in the 80s. Of course, vineyard work improved. Of course, the idea of a very, very good wine developed further. But apart from that, it's still a very, very more or less the same approach in the vineyard. Also in the structure of the wine industry here. If you go to Kremstal, Kamptal, you find many, many family estates that work on 40 hectares, 50 hectares, 80 hectares, 120 hectares. You don't find it here. A very, very typical family estate has its 15 to 20 hectares, and that's already pretty large. There are one or two exceptions that might have a little bit more than 20 hectares, but that's what you can work in a family structure. Maybe 2 generations, brother, sister together, but 20 hectares is already a lot for a Wachau producer. In other regions, you can mechanize a lot. You can do all your vineyards with a tractor, soil management, even harvesting, but here's a very, very handcrafted approach. On the terraces, you have to do it by hand anyway, 100%. On the flat area, you can drive through with a tractor. It's 100% handpicked. It's very, very important. 100% handpicked. There's no machine harvesting here in the region. Very, very important for the quality. We have humid climate. You have the Danube that delivers humidity. It's cool climate. Sooner or later, in many years, you have botrytis pressure, so you have to select in the vineyard. You have several passages, several trees. When you go into vineyard, you do not pick everything at the same time. You pick some apart later. So there's still a very, very kind of traditional, positive scene, conservative approach in the vineyard, in the winery. Of course, things changed, but Wachau never followed any trends or innovations that you find somewhere else.
From my perspective, as from a very traditional winery, when I came to a winery, I had a problem. I liked the wines of my father, right. So there was no big reason to change. And so the idea of how a good wine, in our term, of course, looks, we were always on the same level. But of course, the style of the wine changed. I would say until the late 90s, the wines were very, very pure, slim, and ongoing with 98, 2000, we started we as a winemaker, but also our consumers liked wines with a lot of body, which ended, I would say, in the end of 2000. And since that, the wines again come more compact. And I would love to say it's because I'm in charge of the cellar now, but I would say also my father would do the same decisions, because just the taste of us wine drinkers changed. And maybe in 5 or 6 or 10 years, we again love wines with 15 alcohol. So the whole thing is always a kind of, there's nothing that wasn't here before. Because the food is changing quite a bit, right? Because of multicultural cities and everything. So I'm sure the wines have to tweak a little bit to get there, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's a whole more cultural
change.
But
we're not doing wine in terms of I like this kind of meat. I want to produce a wine to finish that meat up. You know what I mean? Right. Kind of. Yeah. What we. You want to finish? No? Yeah. What I also saw, like not only in my winery but itself, the whole growers side is that there was more changing in the wheat cultures than in the winemaking, the cellar part. So in former times, like 10, 15 years ago, or even earlier, lots of people still, they worked a little bit more conservative and easy. So there was, now we're planting different seeds to get the soil a little bit more alive. And like 10, 15 years ago, if you saw a flower, then you thought that it's gonna be bad for your wine because it takes water out.
Right.
And now we know. We also look at all the stuff, at butterflies, at bees. So lots of wine growers stopped spraying herbicides, stopped spraying pesticides. Now everything is full of pheromone. So there's no people spraying any stuff of this, which was not 10 years ago.
In the whole Wachau, actually. The whole Wachau is actually pesticide-free.
So now the people, especially the viticulturists, they work now more with nature than it was 15 years ago.
Well, that's a good part.
Yeah.
As a chef,
Definitely.
as a chef, we get pushed towards modernist cuisine, modernist way of doing things. We don't want to go there, but we still have to do it just to make it successful. Does the winemaker think like that too? Does the winemaker get pressurized by the new things going on?
Yes,
Let's
and
tweak a little
yes
bit
and no. Correct. If you read newspaper now, you will find much more articles about how's the company called who sells pesticides and Monsanto.
Right.
Yeah. So if you read newspaper now, you will find lots of articles about Monsanto. You didn't have that 15 years ago. So everybody was like, pesticides helps me, makes it easier for me, herbicides makes it easier for me. Now the people go back again. You see, it's not easier for me again, but it's better for the environment.
Right.
Yeah.
The Wachau is family-driven, small structured, so kind of smaller estates. But also in the vineyard, you find it mostly highly fragmented. It's very, very rare that you find a plot, ownership of 1 hectare or 2 hectares. So it's highly fragmented. It's normally 2-3 rows owned by one producer, grower, the next couple of rows owned by a different one. Then it changes to the next ownership. So it's highly fragmented in the vineyard. And the basic reason is because it's mostly handworked. So there's no reason to lease the neighboring vineyard because you would drive through with the tractor. It can be also kind of advantage to have on the Loibenberg, for example, a little bit on the high altitude and a little bit on the lower altitude, and you do it Loibenberg, and you end up with a very, very typical style of a Loibenberg. Anything to add?
In many regions, you found that in the 70s, 80s, all the farmers put all the land together, and everybody got out the same size, but in a bigger parcel. I don't know how. You understand what I mean?
You have same size, but also you have.
Let's say you have 10 hectares, and you have 10 winemakers. Everybody of the winemakers has, let's say, 10 fields. They all put together, and then every winemaker gets 10 fields out of it. So, but bigger ones. And that's what happened in a lot of regions in the Rheingau or also in other regions in Austria. In the Wachau, that never happened. So because of giving the vineyard to your childs, you had to split it because you maybe just had those two, and so got a parcel of it. And that's why you find those very little parcels, and it never came back together. So that's why it's still very. I think it's something that really helps the charm of the Wachau, that it's just very little parcels.
Yes, Ms. Funke, which question?
So we've been tasting all Smaragd wines.
Yes.
And if you read the books that are available in English, there's kind of 2 divides in style in the Wachau. One of them is the question of oak stainless or use neutral cast duo. The other is the question of the trials. Where have you seen the wines going, especially within the Smaragd style? Is it more just later harvest but fully healthy grapes?
Let's attack this question in the next slide, or in the next slide. Let's do the Achleiten, then we come back on that, okay? Promise. So we are tasting now 2 Riesling Achleiten. So we had mostly Grüner Veltliner so far. Now we're doing 2 Rieslings. There's a difference in Grüner Veltliner and Riesling, of course. So close to 70% of the production here is Grüner Veltliner. About 20% is Riesling. Wachau has by far the highest percentage of Riesling plantings of all Austrian wine regions. All over Austria, Riesling is at 3 or 4%. Of course, you find wineries that have a much higher Riesling percentage in their plantings. How much Riesling do you have?
Around 35%.
35% is a very, very typical percentage of a high-end producer in Wachau. All over Wachau, it's 20%, slightly above 20%. Grüner Veltliner is a variety that is planted on all type of soils. On the valley floor, you find mostly Grüner Veltliner and a little bit of other varieties such as Blauer Zweigelt and Muscat and so on. But you find Grüner Veltliner also on steep terraces, high altitude. It might suffer a little bit on very, very meager soils on very high altitude, but it works. But the Riesling is almost only on terraced vineyards. There's a huge difference in drought stress, and we are at the very edge of rainfall where wine production is possible. We're at 450, maximum 500 millimeters of rainfall per year. In very, very dry years, there is a certain drought stress, and Riesling can handle that much, much better than Grüner Veltliner. Grüner Veltliner has already somewhat thicker skins, and when it becomes dry and drier and hotter, the skins become even thicker, and Grüner Veltliner might offer certain off flavors in very, very dry conditions. And if you if you work in future more and more with Austrian wine, and if you are facing low-end entry-level Grüner Veltliner, you have to be careful, because in very dry years, Grüner Veltliner low ends doesn't offer this typical spiciness. So, just quickly comparing Grüner Veltliner and Riesling in 2 words. Now we are concentrating on the single vineyard Achleiten. Achleiten in the very center of Wachau, and Achleiten has a very, very unique standing among all the single vineyards in Wachau. In total, we have around 130 exactly demarcated single vineyards. They're very, very famous names such as Sigl, Ried, Loiben, the Kellerberg. Achleiten has a very, very, very unique standing. There's a certain mystery around Achleiten. It's also somehow larger, 20 hectares. It combines the typical geology in one site. What you have to remember on the geology of Wachau is the name gneiss, very, very important. This is the bedrock that we have here. It's not granite, so if you are reading a badly translated or an older wine book, you might find the word granite, which is not correct. You have granite further north, but not here in Wachau. It's all metamorphic rock. Marble is also part of these metamorphic rocks coming from limestone. And Achleiten has both of these gneiss types, the ortho gneiss and the paragneiss. So there's a certain diversity in the bedrock. Also very, very important when we talk about geology, the Wachau offers one of the oldest geological formations that we find worldwide. Just to give you an example, when you go skiing in Europe, to the Alps, Switzerland, St. Moritz, Kitzbühel, wherever, the Alps were folded up some 30, 40, 50 million years ago. The bedrock that we are sitting on right now is 400 to 500 million years old, so much, 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 much older, which means that there's an extremely high level of decomposed weathered, eroded material of this bedrock, and the geology, the gneiss is highly influenced or highly dominated by cracks, by fissures, by small holes, and the fiber roots can really penetrate into the bedrock. They find the humidity, the moisture in the bedrock, and we cannot prove that scientifically that this kind of rock is offering this kind of flavor, but we can see it in our wines. There's a certain uniqueness in specific soils and sites, and Achleiten is one of these sites that is offering a very, very unique flavor profile, and you always have a certain flintiness, smokiness in Achleiten vineyard. Achleiten is a vineyard that starts pretty slowly to develop, and it's used somehow even a little bit restrained, but extreme longevity, even after 10, 15, 20 years, and Achleiten vineyard can offer great complexity. A very, very young Riesling Smaragd from the Achleiten vineyard from Winery Praga, one of these very, very, very top high-end producers. I think a very, very classic, modern style, concentrated, full-bodied, kind of really, really structured Riesling Smaragd from the Vineyard Achleiten. And then we have a 1999 from a year which is seen as a very, very good year out of the 1990s. The 1990s had kind of different approach, as Franz already explained. When botrytis was found, because of the vintage conditions, it was taken, it was not refused. 1999 was a year where there was almost no botrytis, so we have a very clean, a very, very lean, very, very savory but elegant-driven Riesling Smaragd with some years of age. This comes from Domaine Wachau. Domaine Wachau, the winery that we are sitting right now, the underground cellar that you have seen, has a very, very special positioning here in Wachau. We are organized as a cooperative. We work with 250 families. The average holding of our growers is 1 or 2 hectares, so extremely small scaled. Very, very important for us. Some 20 years ago, it was run like a normal cooperative. When Heinz Frischengruber, our winemaker, arrived some 15 years ago, we changed the approach in our vineyard with a very, very quality-driven approach. And we see our growers today as highly specialized viticulturists, as highly specialized vineyard workers. So we do not send out employees or temporarily workers in our vineyards. It's always the owner working on this small parcel on 1 or 2 hectares. With an individual approach, because it makes a difference if you're in high altitude or low altitude. If you're eastern Wachau, western Wachau, you have to be flexible in your vineyard. You cannot go out with one rule, and that's what we have to do today. Depends very much where you have your parcel. Wine number 8, then 99 Riesling Smaragd Achleiten. Riesling with some age, but still I think a very, very elegant Riesling style, with a lot of freshness.
Yeah, maybe to finish your question, about the botrytis question. Yeah, I think it's you need to see in former times ago, some people or the grapes needed botrytis to get the fuller ripeness, which is not now anymore, because now because of climate change, the wines sometimes ripen without botrytis still full enough. I think it's not a question about winemaker. I think it's more a question about vintage. Sometimes we have vintages like 2014 where there was an enormous amount of botrytis. Sometimes like 2017 there was almost no botrytis at all. So if there's no rain coming in the weather forecast, then there will not be a botrytis infection. So then you harvest, of course, later, earlier sometimes. So if you have the ripening already in healthy grapes, then sometimes you don't need it actually. But sometimes, like in 2014, it's actually almost impossible to harvest without botrytis. That's my point of view.
The thing is about botrytis, when we talk about or in my estate, and we're kind of very classic estate which uses some botrytis. As you said, sometimes when it's there, it's used. But also when we use it, it means it's 3, 4, maybe 5%. If it's higher, you normally do a sweet wine out of it. But botrytis, if you collect it very, very clean, and with clean meaning, I mean, if you have botrytis, you also have other diseases in your grape. You have a grey rot and vinegar rot, all those things. So you need really good picking crew to select that and to really just leave the right botrytis in the grape. But when you get that, botrytis can add an extra layer of texture. And then I find it sometimes very interesting to have this balance of texture, but still the fruit and the liveliness of the healthy grapes. So this game is sometimes in the wines very interesting, to have both characters, the very ripe ones which give you texture, and the very healthy ones which give you fruit and drive. So, yeah.
Flight number 5 is being poured, or almost poured for everybody. We are moving now from east to west. So we had the Loibenberg wines, we had the Achleiten wines, and now we're going to the villages of Joching and Wösendorf. Joching and Wösendorf, this is one of the crucial villages where we have a certain Löss influence. Normally we talk about very, very meager soils here, very, very rocky soils. You can imagine on the steep terraces over a million of years, the topsoil was washed down. So we work on very shallow soils here. This is a big challenge also for wine production here, because you need to create humus. You have to work with cover crop. But there's a small sector, which is in the town of Joching-Wösendorf, where Löss has a certain importance. So you know about Löss, the sandy, loose material with more water holding capacity. And Pichel Point, the first Grüner Veltliner, is one of these vineyards.
There's even in Pichel Point, there is so much Löss that there you still find an old oven for building bricks. So it's one of the really Löss-driven vineyards, which when we have Hochrhein as the second wine, Hochrhein has in the bottom a lot of Löss, but as further you go up, in the subgroup Rheinleis, which also belongs to Hochrhein. So in the bottom part, the Hochrhein looks a lot like the Pichel Point there. So it's more in Joching Wösendorf. It's more a matter of the height of the level where you are. So that in the basements, also the hillsides are covered with a big layer of Löss. And as further you go up, and that's about half of the way to the top of Hochrhein, the wine is mainly driven by a nice primary rock soil. And that's for sure something on the 2008. And 2008 was one of the not overripe years in the last vintages. I know from Rudi that he has parts of the wine or part of his grapes for the bottom part where you have more of the Löss influence, and parts on the top part where you get this more mineralic style of aromatic. And this combination of the bottom of the hill and the top of the hill is sometimes very interesting. And Schmelz, of course, as he's always working with very clean fruit, very straight, precise wines.
Before we move on to the next flight, just 2 or 3 words on dry stone walls. And you are actually visiting the Wachau in a very, very nice season of the year, because you can still see all these dry stone walls. Later in the season, when we have full canopy and all the leaves out there, you don't even notice that easily that all the terraces are built on dry stone walls. We don't know exactly when these dry stone walls were first established and built, but probably 11th, 12th century, at the time by the church, by the monks. Building dry stone walls is a very, very old handcrafting technique, because we even had the danger that this technique, this knowledge, was lost, because usually it's moved from one generation to the next. It's a very, very complicated thing to build dry stone walls. So it's stone on stone, without any binding material, without any concrete, and very, very important for the terroir that we have here in the Wachau, for the biodiversity. During summer, the dry stone walls heat up on the outside, very high temperature. It also affects the growing patterns of a vine, of the vineyards that are built on dry stone walls. But inside, and they are pretty deep, so they are not just a very, very slim wall, they are broad, deep walls. And inside, it's the space room, the habitat for dozens of small insects and animals, because it stays very, very humid and cool inside. So it's extremely important for the biodiversity, for the terroir that we have here in Wachau. And extremely important, it influences enormously the working costs on the terraces, because the maintenance of the dry stone walls is very, very labor intense. The building of dry stone walls is very, very labor intense, and that's what you all have to take into account when working on the terraces. It's not just working the vine and picking the grapes; it's the maintenance of the terraces of the dry stone wall as well. And it's a very, very old technique, still very important, because when there's rainfall, the water can move through. In some instances, when there's extremely strong rainfall, a dry stone wall can be washed down. And we had this huge rainfalls in 2002, where there was huge damage on the dry stone walls. And sooner or later, they also need a little bit of maintenance. But I'm sure Franz is a specialist in dry stone walling.
Yeah.
Is he?
I'll do the whole day. No, but we had it's actually right for both of the last wines, the Hirtzberger and the Sigl. The Hirtzberger especially, where Johann Donnerbaum has his vineyard on the western part of Hirtzberg. There it's a really just dry stone wall terrace site, and it's true for the Sigl. That was really a problem about 30 years ago, that those sites were left behind and not planted anymore, and there was a lot of work done the last decades to rebuild those walls. And it's not like you go out and hire some people to make that. It's normally something you do over a few years. So we had on Sigl, we have now 3 hectares, and more than 1.5 hectare was not cultivated anymore 30 years ago. So we did every year, we rebuilt it 2-3 walls. It took us 20 years to rebuild the whole site. Because you do it with your own people in winter time when you have time for that. It's a very expensive thing. You can, if you say around €200 per square meter to build the wall, that's around what you have. I think Michael is pretty nervous now because of time, but we need to challenge him in terms of nervosity. The Hirtzberg, especially on the west side, is the last hill, which is intensely influenced by the cold winds which come down here. And I mean, winds is maybe not the right word. It's more a constantly moving airflow. And when you pass this valley here on the Danube in summer with your bike, you really feel how it pushes down the cold air. And the Hirtzberg is one of the last influence when you're there. It's on the very very top of Hirtzberg. Yeah. And on the right side we have then the Sigl from my winery. Sigl is a vineyard which is very special for us because it's on just behind our winery. And as I mentioned before, big parts of it were not big parts of our part of the Sigl, which is the front one, were not cultivated anymore in the 50s and 60s. So when my father took over, he started to replant that. And what for me makes this wine very special is because we also have some a single vineyard from Hirtzberger, which is like the one from Johann on the very top part. You get from the top part it's very mineralic driven aromatics, always more slimmer, compact, a style of grapes and wine. And on our part of Sigl, we have the kind of the aromatics from the bottom to the top. And I normally try to ferment it in the cellar in different parts, so the bottom part separately and the top part. And you always get this more apricot, richer aromatic from the bottom because you have more soil there. It's just easier for the vine to grow there. To the more mineralic and sharper, compact aromatics from the top. And to combine that in a wine like Rudy does on the Hochhain gives very interesting results because you get this balance of power and minerality.
And any questions?
Are all these wines exported
to where? To where?
like Canada?
To Salzburg and Tyrol, yes. To Canada probably. Canada probably not. But many of them I would say, in small volumes. But most of them I think you should.
Not many to Canada.
Yeah.
Because Canada is still.
That's bio run.
I would say to the US.
What you see in these two wines are very, very good example for Wachau in general. It's a small region, but highly complex in altitude, influence of the Danube, geology, topsoil, sometimes deeper, sometimes very, very meager topsoil, northern bank, southern bank. Very, very important. There are 20, 30 years ahead in history. So there's also more, I think, a much, much stronger individual development of certain producers with their style that they follow. And in this very, very small region, you find a certain specific, unique Wachau style, but you also find a great diversity within the Wachau because of the different terroirs. And I think the last flight is a very, very good example. Of course, you have the difference in age. The 17 young Riesling, the 12 with some 5 years more developed. But they are not that far apart from each other. But still, the Hirtzberg is even slightly cooler in the Spitz Valley, in the cooler part. 17 was a pretty nice. It was a warm year, but still on the high altitude the wine is grown. You have this elegance. You have this brighter flavors. 2012 was a definitely warmer year. You have Franz as his style that he goes for concentrated, full-bodied Rieslings. And as he explains, he's also in altitude with a little bit more lower altitude influence here. So two top Rieslings, but very, very different in style. But both have the typical Wachau expression. In both wines you find a very, very ripe, very high firm acidity that is giving the first one even more freshness. And the second one, with all its concentration, it's nicely balanced and drinkability. And that's what should be the basic idea of Wachau. Cool climate, small region, basically nice as bedrock, but still you find huge variation in terroirs. But whatever style you drink, something that is unique for all the styles here is a very, very firm, high acidity, balancing out concentration, the late peaking that we do, and drinkability is a thing that we're searching in our wines. Joe, your words to say.
Are you on me? Yeah.
I agree with all what he said.
Well then, say goodbye.
Just a word maybe to 17 for me. It's like 18, a very hot vintage. But I think as we as winemakers in the Wachau showed how we learned over the last decades how to deal with those hot years and how to work in the vineyard to have maybe a warmer character wine, but not a hot one. Those wines still are very mineralic driven, very, very precise. And that's something special for me on the 17 vintage for the whole Wachau that we all learned a lot the last 20 years and how to deal with warm years. So 17 and 18 are two vintages which make me look very, very hopeful in the future that we don't get a big problem with climate change. In terms of wine growing, in terms of environmental, of course, but.
So the many things that we haven't discussed, that we haven't talked about, and one of these is global warming, climate change. The other thing is the age of the vines here in Wachau, the number of good restaurants that we have in Wachau. So sorry that you have to leave our region. I hope we gave you enough reason to come back. So hope you enjoyed this tasting. Thanks a lot for... wishing you a nice day in Austria and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roman, and to all at Domain Wachau. I'm sure some of the most in-depth information available anywhere in audio format. So please do share if you know anybody who works with these wines. And also, if you know anybody working with these wines who's not aware of the podcast, do be sure to direct them to interpretingwine.com/listen, where they can subscribe. We continue our journey down the Danube in this Austrian Wine Summit special, next time in episode 362, with an in-depth seminar on Kamptal. See you then.